The diner's fluorescent lights flickered as Ethan wiped down a sticky table, the late-night crowd thinning to a hum. A couple sat in the corner booth, the woman's eyes darting nervously. As Ethan cleared their plates, a napkin fluttered to the floor. Scrawled in bold red lipstick was a single word: SOS. His heart stopped. Who was she? Why was she asking for help? And why did her desperate gaze linger on him as she left? Ethan had worked at Rosie's Diner for 3 years, pouring coffee and slinging burgers to keep his head above water. At 32, he was a man of quiet routines, his dreams of opening his own auto shop buried under a mountain of bills and a past he'd rather forget. Raised in a small Ohio town, Ethan had been the kid who fixed everyone's bikes, always with grease on his hands and a grin on his face. But a bad business deal with a shady partner had left him broke and distrustful, retreating to the simplicity of waiting tables. The diner was his refuge, a place where he could blend into the background, unnoticed but reliable. That night, the diner was its usual mix of truckers, night shift nurses, and the occasional drifter. Ethan moved through the tables with practiced ease, his broad shoulders and easy smile earning him tips and small talk. But his eyes kept drifting to the corner booth where the couple sat. The woman, maybe late 20s, had a fragile beauty, dark hair pulled into a messy bun, her green eyes shadowed with something heavy. Her companion, a man in an expensive suit, leaned too close, his voice low but sharp. Ethan caught fragments. "You don't get to decide, Claire." Her name was Claire. When Ethan approached to clear their plates, the man barely glanced up, but Claire's eyes locked onto his for a split second, wide and pleading. As he stacked their dishes, the napkin slipped to the floor. Ethan knelt to pick it up, and that's when he saw it. SOS, written in smudged red lipstick. His pulse quickened. Was it a joke? A mistake? But the way Claire's hand trembled as she reached for her purse told him it wasn't. He pocketed the napkin, his mind racing. Should he say something? Call the cops? But the couple was already standing, the man's hand gripping Claire's arm as they headed for the door. Ethan watched, frozen, as her gaze flickered back to him, a silent cry. Then they were gone, swallowed by the neon glow of the parking lot. Back in the kitchen, Ethan leaned against the counter, the napkin burning a hole in his pocket. He'd seen trouble before. His own life was proof of it. 5 years ago, he'd trusted the wrong person, a so-called friend who'd swindled him out of his savings and left him scrape by. Since then, Ethan had kept people at arm's length, preferring the safety of solitude. But this was different. That word, SOS, was a call he couldn't ignore. He pulled out the napkin, staring at the shaky letters. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe she was just dramatic. But his gut told him otherwise. He thought of his mom, who'd raised him alone after his dad walked away. She'd always said, "Kindness costs nothing, Ethan, but it can change everything." He folded the napkin and tucked it back into his pocket, resolving to act if he saw her again. The next night, Ethan scanned every face that walked through the diner's doors. His co-worker, Marla, a no-nonsense woman with a smoker's rasp, noticed his distraction. "You okay, kid? You're jumpier than a cat in a rainstorm," she teased, tossing him a rag. Ethan just nodded, not ready to share the napkin secret. Around 9 p.m., Claire walked in alone. Ethan's heart lurched. She wore a faded denim jacket, her hair loose now, and sat at the counter, ordering coffee with a voice so soft he had to lean in to hear. Her hands fidgeted, and a faint bruise peeked out from under her sleeve. Ethan's stomach twisted. He poured her coffee, sliding a napkin toward her with a pen. "You need anything else?" he asked, his tone careful but pointed. Claire's eyes flicked to the napkin, then to him. For a moment, she hesitated, then scribbled something quickly and pushed it back. "Help me. He's watching." Ethan's breath caught. He glanced around. No sign of the man in the suit, but the diner's windows felt like eyes. He leaned closer, keeping his voice low. "What's going on? Are you safe?" She shook her head slightly, her lips trembling. "Not here," she whispered. "He'll come back soon." Before Ethan could press further, the bell above the door jingled, and the man in the suit strode in. Claire stiffened, her coffee untouched. Ethan stepped back, busying himself with wiping the counter, but his mind was on fire. Who was this guy? And how could he help her without making things worse? The man, who Claire called Nathan in a strained introduction, ordered a burger with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Ethan watched as Nathan's hand rested possessively on Claire's shoulder, his fingers digging in just enough to make her wince. Ethan's fist clenched under the counter. He'd seen men like Nathan before, charming on the surface, controlling underneath. His mom had dated one once, and Ethan, just a teenager then, had felt the same helpless rage. As Nathan paid the bill, Claire slipped another napkin into Ethan's hand under the guise of handing him her mug. Meet me at the gas station across the street. Midnight. Ethan's heart pounded. This was his chance to help, but it meant stepping into a mess he wasn't sure he was ready for. He thought of his mom again, her voice echoing. Kindness costs nothing, but he knew it could cost him everything. At midnight, Ethan stood by the gas station's flickering sign, the napkin crumpled in his pocket. The air was thick with the smell of gasoline and late summer heat. He'd told Marla he was taking a break, but his nerves were shot. What if this was a setup? What if Nathan was waiting? But then Claire appeared, alone, her jacket pulled tight around her. Her eyes were red, her voice barely above a whisper. Thank you for coming. Who's Nathan? Ethan asked, keeping his distance but his tone firm. And what's the SOS about? Claire glanced over her shoulder, her voice shaking. He's my fiancé. Was my fiancé. I can't stay with him anymore. He's not who he seems. She explained in halting words how Nathan, a wealthy real estate developer, had swept her off her feet 2 years ago. But his charm had turned to control, watching her every move, cutting her off from friends, threatening her if she tried to leave. She'd written the SOS on impulse, desperate for a way out. Ethan listened, his jaw tight. He knew what it was like to feel trapped, to lose everything to someone else's lies. Why me? He asked, almost to himself. Claire's eyes softened. You look kind, like you'd listen. Those words hit Ethan hard, cracking the walls he'd built around himself. He didn't know her, but he couldn't walk away. Okay, he said finally. What do you need? She took a shaky breath. A place to hide, just for tonight. He's got people watching my apartment. Ethan hesitated. His one-bedroom apartment was barely big enough for him, and letting a stranger in was a risk. But her trembling hands and the bruise on her wrist made the decision for him. All right, he said, but we gotta be smart about this. He led her to his beat-up Chevy, checking the rearview mirror as they drove to his place on the edge of town. As they pulled into his apartment complex, headlights flashed in the rearview mirror. A black SUV idled across the street, its driver hidden in the dark. Ethan's grip tightened on the wheel. Was it Nathan? And how far would he go to keep Claire from escaping? Ethan's grip tightened on the steering wheel as the black SUV lingered in the distance. He parked in the shadow of his apartment building, his heart hammering. Stay low, he whispered to Claire, who crouched in the passenger seat, her breath uneven. The SUV didn't move, but its presence felt like a weight on Ethan's chest. After a tense minute, it pulled away, disappearing into the night. Ethan exhaled, but the unease stayed. Let's move, he said, leading Claire inside, his eyes scanning the empty lot. Inside his cramped apartment, Ethan offered Claire a blanket and a lumpy couch. She sat, clutching the fabric like a lifeline, her eyes darting to the window. He'll find me, she said, her voice barely audible. He always does. Ethan pulled a chair from the kitchen, sitting across from her. Not tonight, he said, trying to sound surer than he felt. Tell me everything. If I'm in this, I need to know what I'm dealing with. Claire's story spilled out in fragments. She'd grown up in a small Indiana town, raised by a single mom who worked double shifts at a factory. Claire had dreamed of being a teacher, but Nathan's promises of a better life had pulled her into his world. At first, it was lavish dinners and weekend trips. But soon, he controlled her phone, her money, her time. He'd get so angry, she said, her voice cracking. I tried to leave once. He found me at a friend's house. Said if I ever tried again, I'd regret it. Ethan's stomach churned. He thought of his own past, how his business partner's betrayal had left him broke and alone. He'd rebuilt his life inch by inch, but trust was still a bruise that hadn't healed. Helping Claire felt like stepping onto thin ice, but her fear was real, and so was the flicker of hope in her eyes. "You're safe here," he said, though he wasn't sure he believed it. "Get some rest. We'll figure out a plan tomorrow." The next morning, Ethan woke to the smell of coffee. Claire stood in his tiny kitchen, pouring 2 mugs. "I hope this is okay," she said, offering a shy smile. "It's the least I can do." The small gesture caught Ethan off guard. He hadn't had anyone make him coffee since his mom passed 3 years ago. He took the mug, their fingers brushing, and for a moment, the weight of the night before lifted. "Thanks," he said, his voice softer than he meant. They sat at his rickety table, planning her next steps. Claire needed to get to her mom's place in Indiana, but Nathan had her ID and bank cards. Ethan suggested a women's shelter he'd heard about through Marla, who'd volunteered there. "They can help you start over," he said. "Get you somewhere safe." Claire nodded, but her eyes were distant. "I've been running on empty for so long," she said. "I don't even know who I am anymore." Ethan understood that feeling, losing yourself to someone else's choices. He wanted to say something, but words felt too small. Instead, he offered to drive her to the shelter after his shift. That evening at the diner, Ethan was distracted, his eyes on the door. Marla noticed, pulling him aside. "You're in deep, aren't you?" she said, her gaze sharp. Ethan hesitated, then showed her the napkin with SOS. Marla's face softened. "Be careful, Ethan. People like her fiancé don't let go easy." As his shift ended, Ethan's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Where is she?" His blood ran cold. He rushed to his apartment, finding Claire pacing, her face pale. "He called my mom," she said, her voice shaking. "He knows I'm not at my place." Ethan's mind raced. The SUV from last night. Was it Nathan's? Or someone he'd hired? "We're leaving now," Ethan said, grabbing his keys. But as they stepped outside, headlights flared again. The black SUV was back, parked across the street. Ethan's heart pounded. He pulled Claire behind him, his voice low. "Stay close." They ducked into his car, but the SUV followed, tailing them through the quiet streets. Ethan drove to the shelter, his knuckles white on the wheel. The SUV stayed a car length behind, never closing the gap. At a red light, Claire gripped his arm. "I'm scared," she whispered. Ethan glanced at her, her face illuminated by the streetlights. "I won't let him hurt you," he said, surprised by the fierceness in his voice. They reached the shelter, a nondescript building with a security gate. Ethan explained the situation to the intake worker, who ushered Claire inside. Before she went, Claire turned to him, her eyes glistening. "You didn't have to do this," she said. "But you did." She squeezed his hand, a fleeting touch that sent a jolt through him. As Ethan drove home, the SUV was gone, but the weight of Nathan's threat lingered. He couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The next day, he called the shelter to check on Claire. She was safe, but she'd left a message. "I'm heading to Indiana tomorrow." "Thank you, Ethan." His chest ached with a mix of relief and something else, something he hadn't felt in years. Days turned into weeks, and Ethan threw himself into work, trying to forget Claire's green eyes and the way her hand felt in his. But one night, as he locked up the diner, he saw Nathan standing across the street, his face hard. "You think you're a hero?" Nathan called, stepping closer. "She's mine, and I'll find her." Ethan's blood boiled, but he kept his voice steady. "She's gone. Let her go." Nathan smirked, but there was a crack in his confidence. Ethan stood his ground, his fists clenched. He wasn't a fighter, but he'd do what it took to protect Claire. Nathan stepped closer, his voice low. "You're in over your head, waiter." Before Ethan could respond, Nathan's phone rang, and he turned away, his face darkening as he answered. Ethan didn't wait to hear more. He got in his car, his heart racing, knowing he'd just drawn a line he couldn't uncross. As he drove away, his phone buzzed with a voicemail from Claire. Her voice was shaky but determined. "Ethan, I'm safe, but Nathan's coming for me. I need you." The line went silent. "I understand you want each part of the story to be 2,300 words, and you've already received 3 parts at 1,950 words each. Since you've requested to continue with longer parts, I'll rewrite part 3 to meet the 2,300-word requirement, ensuring aligns with the existing narrative, maintains the emotional depth, slow burn romance, and themes of love, forgiveness, and second chances, while resolving the hook from part 2. I'll also keep the style conversational, realistic, with an American flavor, avoiding prohibited words and ensuring a seamless transition. If you'd like me to rewrite parts 1 and 2 as well to hit 2,300 words each, let me know, and I can do that in subsequent responses. For now, here's the extended part 3. Ethan replayed Claire's voicemail, his hands trembling as he sat in his beat-up Chevy outside Rosie's diner. Her words, "I need you," looped in his mind, each syllable heavy with urgency. He called the women's shelter, his voice tight, but the worker confirmed Claire had left for Indiana that morning. No one knew her exact whereabouts now. Ethan's gut churned. Nathan was closing in. He could feel it, and Claire's safety hung by a thread. He gripped the steering wheel, staring into the dark parking lot. Why did the thought of losing her hit so hard? He barely knew her, yet her face, those green eyes, that fleeting smile, had carved a space in his chest he hadn't realized was empty. He made a snap decision. Indiana was a 6-hour drive, and he had Claire's mom's address from their talks. A small house in Franklin, a quiet town where she'd grown up. Ethan tossed his apron onto the passenger seat, the diner's neon sign buzzing behind him. He didn't have a plan, just a pull he couldn't ignore. The road stretched out under a starless sky, and as he drove, memories of Claire flooded in. The way she'd made him coffee in his cramped kitchen, her shy smile as their fingers brushed. The way she'd looked at him at the gas station, trusting him when she had no reason to. Ethan had spent years keeping people at arm's length, burned by a business partner who'd stolen his savings and his dreams. But Claire's vulnerability, her quiet strength, had cracked something open in him. Was it love? He wasn't ready to name it, but it was enough to keep him driving through the night. The highway hummed beneath his tires, the radio low with some old country tune about lost love and second chances. Ethan's mind wandered to his own past. Growing up in Ohio, he'd been the kid who could fix anything: bikes, lawnmowers, his mom's old Pontiac. His mom, a single parent who worked nights at a hospital, had been his anchor. "You've got a good heart, Ethan," she'd say, ruffling his hair. "Don't let the world make it hard." But the world had tried. 5 years ago, his business partner's betrayal had left him with nothing but a beat-up truck and a pile of debt. He'd retreated to the diner, where life was simple, predictable, until Claire. Her SOS on that napkin had pulled him back into the mess of caring, and now here he was chasing a woman he barely knew into another state. He stopped for gas halfway, the fluorescent lights of the station casting harsh shadows. As he filled the tank, he checked his phone. No new messages. The uncertainty gnawed at him. What if Nathan had already found her? What if she didn't want his help anymore? He thought of his mom again. Gone 3 years now, her voice still clear. Kindness costs nothing, but it can change everything. He climbed back into the truck, the cold night air sharpening his resolve. Franklin, Indiana, greeted him at dawn, a sleepy town of brick storefronts and sagging porches. Claire's mom's house was a modest bungalow on a quiet street, its paint peeling but the lawn neatly trimmed. Ethan parked, his heart pounding as he approached the door. He knocked, the sound loud in the morning stillness. A woman in her 50s answered, her face etched with worry, her graying hair pulled into a loose bun. "You, Ethan?" she asked, her voice gruff but warm, like she'd smoked one too many cigarettes. "Yeah," he said, shifting on his feet. "Is Claire here?" The woman, Linda, he assumed, studied him for a moment, then stepped aside. "She's here, but she's scared. That man's been calling, saying he's coming for her." Ethan's stomach twisted. He followed Linda inside, the house smelling of coffee and lavender. Claire appeared from the hallway, her dark hair loose, her green eyes red-rimmed but brightening when she saw him. "You came," she said, her voice breaking. She crossed the room and hugged him, a quick, fierce embrace that caught him off guard. Her warmth lingered as she pulled back, her hands trembling. "I didn't know if you would," she added, her gaze searching his. Ethan shrugged, trying to play it cool despite the knot in his throat. Couldn't leave you hanging. They sat in the living room, the couch sagging under them, a faded quilt draped over the armrest. Claire explained how Nathan had tracked her phone before she ditched it at a bus station. She made it to Franklin, but his calls to Linda's landline hadn't stopped, taunting, threatening, always one step behind her. "He's not giving up," she said, her hands twisting in her lap. "He never does." Ethan leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "We'll figure this out. Together." The words felt like a promise, heavier than he'd intended. He called a friend from his old auto shop days, a guy named Mike who knew people in law enforcement. Mike promised to help file a restraining order, but Ethan knew a piece of paper wouldn't stop Nathan. He'd seen the man's eyes outside the diner. Cold, possessive, unyielding. Ethan offered to stay, sleeping on the couch, keeping watch. Linda watched him with a mix of gratitude and suspicion. "You're trouble, aren't you?" she said one night, handing him a beer from the fridge. "Trying not to be," Ethan replied, and she laughed, a raspy sound that reminded him of Claire's softer chuckle. Over the next few days, Ethan and Claire settled into a fragile rhythm. They cooked meals with Linda, simple things like spaghetti and garlic bread, swapped stories about their childhoods, and found moments of lightness. One afternoon, Ethan tried fixing the porch swing, only to have it collapse under him, sending Claire into a fit of laughter. "You're better with cars," she teased, helping him up, her hand lingering on his arm. Those small moments, her smile, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, built a quiet trust between them, a connection deeper than the danger that had brought them together. One night, as they sat on the porch, the air thick with summer's end, Claire touched his hand. "You didn't have to do all this," she said, her voice soft. "Why did you?" Ethan looked at her, the moonlight catching the green in her eyes. He thought of all the reasons he'd stayed, her fear, her strength, the way she made him feel seen. "Because you asked," he said finally, "and because I care." The admission felt like stepping off a ledge, but her smile, small and warm, caught him before he fell. Claire squeezed his hand, her fingers steady despite everything. "I care too," she whispered. The words hung between them, a fragile bridge over the chasm of their pasts. Ethan wanted to say more, to pull her closer, but the weight of their situation held him back. They sat in silence, the crickets filling the gaps, their hands still touching. A week later, trouble arrived. Ethan spotted the black SUV first, parked down the street as he took out the trash. His pulse spiked. He told Claire and Linda to stay inside and called Mike, who said police were on the way. Ethan stepped onto the porch, his heart pounding but his resolve firm. Nathan emerged from the SUV, his expensive suit out of place in the quiet neighborhood. He stopped at the gate, his face a mask of calm fury. "You think you can take her from me?" he said, his voice low, controlled. Ethan squared his shoulders, his voice steady. "She's not yours. Walk away." Nathan's smirk was sharp, but there was a crack in his confidence, a flicker of doubt. Ethan held his ground, his fists clenched at his sides. He wasn't a fighter, but he'd do what it took to protect Claire. Nathan took a step closer, his eyes narrowing. "You're nobody, waiter. You think you're her hero." Before Ethan could respond, police sirens wailed in the distance. Nathan froze, his smirk fading. He turned back to his SUV, slamming the door as he drove off, tires screeching. Ethan exhaled, his legs shaky, but his heart steady. He'd faced Nathan and won, but the victory felt like a held breath, waiting to break. Claire stepped onto the porch, her face pale, but her eyes fierce. She grabbed his hand, her grip tight. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. They stood there, the night wrapping around them, a fragile hope taking root. Ethan felt the warmth of her hand, the weight of what they'd just faced, and something shifted inside him, a certainty that he'd go to the ends of the earth for her. Months passed, and Ethan visited Franklin again. Claire had started working at a local elementary school, her dream of teaching slowly coming back to life. She was different now, stronger, her laughter brighter, though shadows of fear still lingered in quiet moments. Ethan was saving for his auto shop, The spark of his old ambition reignited. He'd started sketching designs again, dreaming of a garage with his name on it. They weren't together, not officially, but their weekly calls and weekend visits felt like a promise, a slow dance toward something more. One Saturday, they sat on Linda's porch, sipping lemonade under a late fall sky. Claire told him about her first day teaching, her eyes sparkling as she described a shy kid who'd drawn her a picture. Ethan shared his plans for the shop, pulling a napkin from his pocket to sketch a logo. Claire laughed, nudging his shoulder. "You're going to make it happen, Ethan. I know you will." Her faith in him was a warmth he hadn't felt in years, like sunlight breaking through clouds. Linda joined them, carrying a tray of cookies, her sharp eyes softening as she watched them. "You too," she said, shaking her head. Trouble and more trouble. But her smile betrayed her approval. Ethan caught Claire's eye, and for a moment, the world was just them, two people who'd found each other in the wreckage of their pasts. The future wasn't certain. Claire was still healing, rebuilding the confidence Nathan had chipped away. Ethan had his own scars, the sting of betrayal still sharp when he thought too long about it. Trust came slow for both of them, but every phone call, every shared laugh, every quiet moment on that porch built something new. It wasn't a fairy tale. They both knew life didn't work that way. Claire had to navigate the fear of Nathan's shadow, the legal battles to keep him at bay. Ethan had bills piling up, the weight of starting over pressing down. But they faced it with a resilience forged in those first desperate days, in the kindness they'd shown each other when it mattered most. As Ethan prepared to leave, Claire walked him to his truck. The air was crisp, leaves crunching under their feet. "You changed everything," she said, her voice soft but sure. "I was lost, and you saw me." Her words hit Ethan like a wave, washing away the last of his doubts. He wanted to tell her how much she'd changed him too, how her courage had pulled him out of his own darkness. But instead, he just knotted his throat tight. She leaned in, her lips brushing his cheek, a quiet promise of something more. "Come back soon," she said, her smile tentative but real. Ethan climbed into his truck, the memory of her touch lingering as he drove back to Ohio. The road felt different now, not just a way back, but a path forward. He didn't know if they'd end up together, but for the first time in years, he was open to finding out. Back at the diner, Marlon noticed the change in him. "You're smiling more, kid," she said, tossing him a rag. "That girl's good for you." Ethan grinned, wiping down the counter, the weight of Claire's kiss still warm on his skin. Life wasn't perfect, but it was enough. They'd found something rare, a connection built on small acts of kindness, on standing up when it counted. Whatever came next, they'd face it together, one step at a time. If this story touched you, comment where you're from and subscribe to the channel for more soul-stirring stories.